They buried me 2 days ago. My wife picked out the casket. My son gave the eulogy. My daughter-in-law wore my mother's pearls to my funeral. They were already dividing $2 million in insurance money. The check hadn't even cleared yet. Only problem? I wasn't dead. You think you know your family. You think blood means loyalty. Think again. The last thing I remember before the darkness was headlights, coming straight at me, wrong lane, November rain, then nothing. I woke up 11 days later in a hospital I didn't recognize. Tubes in my arms, machines beeping, a nurse whose name tag said Patricia adjusting something near my head. Mr. Donovan, can you hear me? I could, barely. My throat felt like sandpaper. My ribs screamed when I tried to move. You were in a serious accident. You've been in a medically induced coma. Your internal injuries were extensive, but you're stable now. You're going to be okay. I tried to ask about my family, my wife, my son, my daughter-in-law, but the words wouldn't come. Patricia patted my hand. Rest now. We've contacted your emergency contact, your brother. He's on his way. My brother, Vincent. That made sense. Vincent was always reliable. I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, it was morning. The light through the window was gray. Winter light, the kind that makes everything feel slower. Vincent was sitting in the chair beside my bed. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. He looked like he'd aged 10 years. Jesus, Warren, I thought you were dead. What happened? Drunk driver. Head-on collision on Highway 11. The other guy died at the scene. The paramedics said you flatlined twice in the ambulance. They didn't think you'd make it. I processed this slowly. Flatlined. Twice. Helen. Does Helen know I'm here? Vincent's face changed. Something I couldn't read. Warren, we need to talk about Helen. What about her? He looked at the door, then back at me, then at his hands. She thinks you're dead. The words didn't make sense at first. I made him repeat them. She thinks you're dead. They all do. Your son Kevin, his wife Danielle, everyone. How's that possible? The hospital contacted your emergency contact. That's me. I was in Vancouver for a conference when it happened. By the time I got the call, you'd been in surgery for 8 hours. They told me to prepare for the worst. But you're here now. You know I'm alive. I know. But Warren, he leaned closer. I got back to Toronto yesterday. I went to your house first, to tell Helen you were in the hospital, to bring her here. He stopped, swallowed hard. There was a funeral, Warren. Your funeral. It happened 2 days ago. I showed up at your house and there were cars everywhere. People in black, a catering truck. I felt like I'd been hit by that car all over again. That's impossible. I've been here for 11 days. Someone would have... I tried to tell them. I walked in and told Helen you were alive. Do you know what she said? I shook my head. She said, that's not possible. I identified the body myself. I felt my stomach drop. My wife of 37 years. The woman I'd built a life with. The woman I'd trusted with everything. She looked at a corpse, saw my wedding ring on its finger and said, yes, that's my husband. Then she asked about the paperwork. Immediately. In my family, blood had a price tag. $2 million. If you think that's cold, wait, it gets worse. Vincent brought me his phone, showed me the obituary. Warren James Donovan, 68 of Toronto, Ontario, passed away on November 14th following injuries sustained in a motor vehicle accident. He is survived by his loving wife, Helen, his son, Kevin, and daughter-in-law, Danielle. I read it 3 times, each time expecting the words to change. They didn't. There was a photo, my photo, from our anniversary last year. Helen had taken it at the restaurant. She'd said I looked distinguished that night. She'd kissed me on the cheek and told me she was lucky. 8 months later, she was planning my funeral. I kept staring at the photo, at my own face, smiling, oblivious. A service had been held at St. Michael's Cathedral, private burial at Mount Pleasant Cemetery. Someone was buried in my grave. I don't understand, I said. How could Helen identify the wrong body? Vincent sat back. I've been asking myself the same question for 3 days. The accident happened on Highway 11. The other driver died at the scene. His name was Marcus Webb, 43 years old, no family listed. So how? The crash was severe, Warren. Both vehicles burned. The coroner's office, they said identification was difficult. They asked next of kin to identify personal effects. Personal effects? Your wallet, your watch, your wedding ring. I looked at my left hand. Bare. No ring. They removed it during surgery, Vincent said. When they told me about the coma, I asked them to store your valuables. It's all in a lockbox at the nurse's station. So somewhere there was a body, wearing my wedding ring, carrying my wallet, and Helen had looked at those items and said, "Yes, that's my husband." "Vincent, how did my wallet and ring end up on another body?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I wasn't supposed to leave the hospital for another week. 3 days after I woke up, I walked out. Vincent drove me to his apartment first, got me cleaned up, gave me clothes. His wife Sandra made me soup and didn't ask questions. I looked in the mirror for the first time since the accident. The man staring back at me had bruises on his face, stitches above his left eye, gray hair I didn't remember having. I was alive, but I didn't look like myself anymore. Maybe that's why Helen didn't fight harder to find me. Then I started digging. Vincent had connections from his years as a forensic accountant. He made some calls, found out things the family didn't know I'd ever find out. First, Helen had filed a life insurance claim, $1.2 million. The policy I'd taken out 15 years ago when Kevin was starting college. Second, the claim had been approved, fast-tracked. Funds were being transferred within the week. You know how long Helen waited after my death to file the claim? 48 hours. My body wasn't even buried yet, and she was on the phone with the insurance company. But here's the part that made me sick. Third, there was a second policy, one I didn't know about, taken out 18 months ago, $800,000, with Helen and Kevin listed as co-beneficiaries. I never signed that policy. Someone forged your signature, Vincent said. Or they had you sign something else and swap the documents. I thought back. 18 months ago, Kevin had asked me to sign some estate planning updates. Danielle had prepared the paperwork. I'd trusted them. The total payout, Vincent said quietly, is $2 million, split between your wife and your son. $2 million. That's what my life was worth to them. 40 years of marriage, 35 years of raising a son. $2 million. Would you sell your father for $1 million? Your husband for half that? They did. There's more, Vincent said. He pulled up something on his laptop. A real estate listing. My house. Our house. The one Helen and I had lived in for 31 years. For sale. Stunning 4-bedroom in Rosedale. Estate sale. $2.8 million. Immediate possession available. Listed the morning after my funeral. She's selling everything, Warren. The house, your car, your investment accounts. Kevin's already been named executor of your estate. I sat there for a long time, watching the rain hit the window. My wife of 37 years, my only son, his wife, who I'd welcomed into the family, helped with her career, treated like my own daughter. They'd buried a stranger in my grave and sold my life. I want you to understand something. This wasn't desperation. They weren't struggling. Kevin drove a BMW. Danielle wore designer clothes. Helen had just redecorated our kitchen for $60,000. They weren't poor. They were greedy, and they thought I was too dead to stop them. Vincent told me something that made my blood freeze. At the funeral, Helen was smiling. Smiling? Not crying, not grieving. Smiling. Kevin noticed it too. He told her to stop. You know what she said? I didn't want to know, but I asked anyway. She said, "Finally." I thought about the last 37 years, the vacations we'd taken, the anniversary dinners, the way Helen used to laugh at my jokes, even the bad ones. Was any of it real? Or had she been waiting all along? I didn't have an answer, but I was going to find one. Vincent's contact at the coroner's office called the next day. "There's a problem," she said. "The DNA from the burial site doesn't match existing samples on file for Warren Donovan." "What samples?" "Hair from his home, a toothbrush. Standard practice in difficult identification cases. So who's buried in his plot? That's the problem. We ran the DNA through the system. Got a hit. Marcus Webb, the other driver from the accident." Vincent and I looked at each other. "You're telling me," I said, "that the man who killed me in that accident is buried in my grave, wearing my ring, with my name on the headstone." "That appears to be the case, Mr. Donovan. Here's what I pieced together over the next 48 hours. The accident was real. The drunk driver was real. But somewhere between the crash site and the morgue, someone switched identities. My wallet and ring were transferred to Marcus Webb's body. My family was called to identify Warren Donovan. Helen saw the items, confirmed the identification, signed the paperwork. Maybe she looked at the burned remains and genuinely believed it was me. Or maybe she knew exactly what she was doing. The more I learned, the more the second option seemed likely. Here's the thing about betrayal that nobody tells you. It doesn't come from enemies. It comes from the people you love most. Helen had been having an affair. 18 months. A man named Carl Rousseau, a financial advisor she'd met at a charity event. Kevin knew about it. Danielle helped arrange the meetings. My own son, my only child. He knew his mother was cheating on me, and he helped her hide it. The affair had started 6 months after I retired. 6 months after I was home more often. 6 months after Helen started complaining that I was always around. I'd thought she was adjusting to having me home. Turns out she was adjusting to a new life without me. Carl Rousseau was 52 years old, divorced, no children. He drove a Mercedes and wore custom suits. He was everything I wasn't. Younger, flashier, more exciting. He was also the one who came up with the plan, the insurance policies, the power of attorney changes, the will updates I'd signed without reading carefully. It was all connected. They didn't just profit from my death. They planned for it. The accident was the opportunity. The switched identities were the execution. And $2 million in insurance money was the payout. I spent 6 days building my case. Vincent helped. Sandra helped. An old friend from my days as a corporate lawyer, Ronald Kemp, came out of retirement to help. The first thing we found made me sick. Kevin had texted Danielle 3 days after my death. The message read, "When does the check clear? I want to book the vacation." Vacation, while his father was in the ground. Then, we found the phone records. Helen had called Carl Rousseau almost 50 times in 14 days, sometimes at 2 a.m., sometimes for an hour, not grieving calls, planning calls. And then, the video. Security footage from the hospital morgue. A man, not hospital staff, entering the room where Marcus Webb's body was stored. He went in with a bag, came out without it. The man in the footage was Carl Rousseau. The bag contained my wallet, my watch, and my wedding ring. The ring Helen had slipped on my finger 37 years ago. The ring she'd promised to cherish until death do us part. She'd used it to fake my death. Ronald laid it all out in his office. Ronald Kemp, 74 years old, retired prosecutor, the kind of man who made defense lawyers cry in courtrooms for 40 years. When I called him from Vincent's apartment and told him what happened, he said 4 words. "I'll be right there." That's the thing about real friends. They show up when the world falls apart. Ronald looked at the evidence for 3 hours. Then he looked at me and smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a man who'd spent his career destroying people who thought they could outsmart the law. "Warren," he said, "your family made one critical mistake." "What's that?" "They thought you'd stay dead." He cracked his knuckles. "Let's destroy them in court." "Warren, you have enough here for criminal charges. Insurance fraud. Conspiracy to commit fraud, potentially obstruction of justice depending on how the coroner's office involvement is classified. What about the body switch? That's complicated. But if we can prove they knowingly misidentified you to collect insurance money, that's a felony. Multiple felonies. What do you recommend? Ronald smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "I recommend you attend your own wake." Helen was holding a reception, 1 month after the funeral. A celebration of life at the Donovan family home, the house that was already under contract to sell. I stood outside for 10 minutes, watching cars arrive, watching people I'd known for decades walk through my front door to celebrate my memory. Then, I walked in. But first, a complication. 10 minutes before I entered, Ronald called. The security footage from the morgue had leaked. Someone at the hospital had tipped off Kevin. They knew I was alive. "Warren, they're panicking in there. I just got word. Kevin made a call to his lawyer 5 minutes ago." "Let him panic. You sure you want to do this?" "I've never been more sure of anything." I hung up. I didn't announce myself, just opened the door and stepped into the foyer. The same foyer where I'd carried Helen across the threshold 37 years ago, where Kevin had taken his first steps, where we'd hung our coats every Christmas. The conversation in the living room stopped. Helen was the first to see me. She was wearing black, tasteful, expensive, new. Her champagne glass hit the floor. "Warren?" "Hello, Helen." The room went silent. 30 people, old friends, neighbors, business associates, all staring at the dead man standing in the doorway. You want to know what silence sounds like? 30 people, champagne in their hands, celebrating your death, and then you walk in. That's silence. I saw faces I recognized. Tom and Marianne from next door, Frank from my old law firm, Helen's sister Patricia, who I'd never liked. Patricia's face was the most interesting. Not shock, not confusion, fear. She knew, she'd known all along. Kevin pushed through the crowd. His face was white. Dad? What? How? I'm not dead, Kevin. I was in the hospital, recovering from the accident for 3 weeks. The same accident that killed Marcus Webb, the man you buried in my grave. Kevin's first reaction wasn't relief that his father was alive. It wasn't joy. It wasn't tears. His first reaction was to look at Helen, at Carl, back at me. And then he said the words I'll never forget. The insurance. Can they take it back? His father rises from the dead, and his first thought is the money. That's who I raised. Someone in the back dropped a champagne glass. No one moved to clean it up. I don't understand. Yes, you do. I stepped further into the room. Every eye followed me. You understand perfectly. So does your mother. So does Danielle. And so does Carl. I looked past Kevin, found Carl Rousseau standing near the fireplace, the man who'd been sleeping with my wife, the man who'd planted my personal effects on a corpse. Hello, Carl. Nice suit. Did the insurance check clear already? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The guests were murmuring now, confused, horrified. Phones were already up. I reached into my jacket, pulled out an envelope. This is for you, Helen. A copy for Kevin and Danielle as well. It's a civil complaint, filed in Ontario Superior Court this morning. Fraud, conspiracy, intentional infliction of emotional distress. I'm also forwarding our evidence to the Ontario Provincial Police. They'll be in touch. Helen's hand was shaking. The envelope trembled as she took it. Warren, please, let me explain. You identified Marcus Webb's body as mine. You collected $2 million in insurance money. You listed our house for sale the morning after my funeral. What exactly do you need to explain? She had no answer. Kevin stepped forward, tried to speak. I held up my hand. Don't. I trusted you. I trusted all of you. And you buried a stranger in my grave so you could cash out and move on. I looked around the room, at the faces I'd known for years, at the life I'd built, at everything I'd thought was real. The police will be here within the hour. The insurance company has already been notified. They've frozen all payouts pending. Investigation. I turned to leave. Warren, wait. I stopped at the door. The headstone with my name on it, I'm having it removed tomorrow. Marcus Webb deserves his own marker. Whatever else he was, he didn't deserve to be buried as someone else. Then I walked out. The investigation moved quickly. Carl Rousseau was arrested first. The security footage from the morgue was enough for an obstruction charge. When they searched his apartment, they found emails detailing the entire plan. Helen and Kevin were arrested the following day. Danielle cooperated with investigators in exchange for a reduced charge. The insurance company filed its own civil suit. The house sale was canceled. All assets were frozen. Ronald handled the criminal referrals. I handled the divorce. It was finalized in 4 months. Helen got nothing. The prenuptial agreement I'd insisted on 37 years ago, the one she'd complained about constantly, protected everything. The house stayed in my name. The investment stayed in my name. The only thing she kept was the shame. Carl Rousseau pleaded guilty to fraud and tampering with evidence, 18 months. Helen pleaded guilty to insurance fraud, 2 years, suspended, plus probation. Kevin, my son, my only child, he went to trial, claimed he didn't know about the body switch, claimed he thought I was genuinely dead, claimed the insurance policies were Helen's idea. The jury didn't believe him. Guilty on 3 counts, 4 years, federal institution. The prosecutor called it a calculated scheme to profit from a father's death. She called my son a man who chose money over family. I'd spent 35 years raising him, teaching him to ride a bike, helping him with homework, paying for his education, giving him loans he never repaid. And this was how he repaid me. I was in the courtroom when they read the verdict. I watched his face crumble, watched them lead him away. He looked back at me once, didn't say anything, just looked. I didn't look away. 1 week after the sentencing, I went to Mount Pleasant Cemetery. The headstone was gone, replaced with a simple marker, Marcus Webb, 1983 to 2024. May he rest in peace. I stood there for a while, thinking about the man who'd killed me, the drunk driver who'd crossed the center line and changed everything. He'd taken my life, but in doing so, he'd revealed the truth about the people I'd trusted most. I left flowers, white lilies, Helen's favorite. The irony wasn't lost on me. I stood there for a long time, longer than I expected, The wind was cold. November again. Almost exactly a year since the accident. A year since I died. A year since I came back. Then I walked away. They buried a stranger in my grave. They thought I'd stay dead. Vincent and Sandra moved back to Toronto. We have dinner every Sunday. Sandra's a terrible cook, but I never complain. I still live in the Rosedale house. Cleaned out every trace of Helen, every photo, every memory, started fresh. Some nights I walked through the empty rooms, past the kitchen where we used to have coffee together, past the den where Kevin used to do his homework, past the bedroom where Helen and I slept for 3 decades. It's quiet now, but it's mine, Kevin's. Daughter, my granddaughter Emma, writes me letters from Montreal. She's 17 now, hasn't spoken to her father since the trial, says she's applying to law school next year. I told her I'd pay for it, all of it. She asked if I'm angry. I told her the truth. I was, for a while. But anger takes energy I don't have to spare anymore. I'm 70 years old. I built a career, raised a family, loved a woman for 4 decades who was waiting for me to die. Now I'm alive, and they're the ones who lost everything. The life insurance payout? Never touched. Forfeited back to the carrier. The house? Still mine. My legacy? I'll leave it to Emma and to the Marcus Webb Memorial Foundation, which provides support for families of accident victims. Some lessons you learn too late, but I learned mine just in time. If your own family buried you for money, would you forgive them? Or would you do what I did?